Welcome to the dark side of the female psyche with Michael Tsarion. Here we will be delving deeply into those dark corners of psychology that few have the courage to acknowledge, the evil that exists within the female psyche. This series aims to offer you viable solutions, resources, and potent insights that can aid you in your rehabilitation and empowerment. But be forewarned, this is a series not for the faint of heart, nor is it for the easily triggered. Rather, it is only for those courageous women who realize the severity of the hour humanity is in. This means if you're going to listen to this series, you need to be ready to take self-ownership over your reactions and your responses. Because while women do hold the power to change the world, the state and quality of that change will invariably be influenced by how well a woman knows her own psyche, how beautiful, honorable, and dignified that woman chooses to become. If you are a woman who is choosing to willfully evolve, if you are a woman who sincerely desires to master yourself, your mind, and your behavior, then the information shared throughout this series will serve you well. Hi, welcome back, Michael. We're continuing our series here, The Dark Side of the Female Psyche, and we've been getting deeper and deeper with each pass, so I'm very, very curious to see where you take things this time, and you can take it from wherever point you'd like.
Thanks. Nice to be back. And yeah, there seems to be a nice flow, which wasn't planned, but there you are. I think that we can, I like, the fact we're going slowly with this because there are so many avenues and sort of little highways that one can also speculate on without going into heavy digression, which I think is wrong. But this one might do that a bit too, because while we're looking at this unfolding subject, which is itself a huge subject, I mean, the subject of the criminal history of womankind, the history of mythology, the symbolism of women through history, it's encyclopedic. But as you go, there's a certain quality, there's a certain other philosophical questions that sometimes pop up and arise, and that are never usually addressed by any of the feminist writers, or by anyone, actually. And I just want to give an example of one or two of those today, that normally you would be asking, outside of this kind of subject. But funny enough, a close reading of this subject, they pop up from within it, very poignantly. And then when you have an author who is unaware of it, and they plow on with their text, it used to irritate me. See, so I used to make a note of these moments where they're waxing philosophical, or something they're saying has a kind of implicit philosophical meaning that might be very rich, and they don't see it, they just keep on going. Then this used to irritate me, so I used to make a note of it, and we'll just show one or maybe two examples of that today, while at the same time stick into the general theme of where we've been going. And then towards the end, there's a very controversial part, which I think, again, not too many people deal with. There's a lot of information on it when you know where to go, and we'll leave that to the end. It's about entheogens and psychotropics, which plays a huge role in this narrative, actually. But on Enslaved, we did something on it recently in a series we did called the Dead Sea Scrolls Deception. It's a 10-part series, and then around 8, 9, and 10, we dabbled into the work of John Allegro, the great John Allegro, and brought up this particular concept. We only have about 2 or 3 slides for us here, but it's something we should visit also, while we're looking at this subject. It's mind-boggling, and it may have a great deal to do with the way history is unfolded, actually.
Oh, very interesting. Okay, so would you like to start with the first slide in that case?
Oh, yeah, if you could read that, we'd be
Sure.
on our way.
Okay. And this is a quote from Carl Bjerregaard from his work, The Great Mother. It states, "The child is not the introduction of a new element into the universe. However individualistic the child may be, it is, after all, only an extension of the mother."
Right. Now, this is very Erich Fromm-like. It's another man who is wanting to exalt the new science and the new discoveries of a few, back in the moving more into the 19th century when certain discoveries were made that made it look like there might have been this universal matriarchy. And it came from J.J. Precaution. We can make links later on for people. J.J. Precaution, the German, Robert Briffault, the Frenchman, and Maria Gimpetus. There's a few names thrown in. Now, later on in history, as we move into the 1970s, some of their work was found to be fraudulent, from an archaeological point of view. And I've posted on that. But the damage had been done. And this writer, is an early theosophist. So he was enamored, as many people were. Many people in Europe were enamored by these discoveries of what looked like possible matriarchies existing. And so somewhat uncritically, they jumped on it. And in my opinion, went a bit too far. Because what they suddenly did was, instead of taking it slowly and saying, well, we would need to really know a lot about what this even means, even if these matriarchies did exist, what were they, what really were they about? No, sadly, some very feminized types jumped on it and immediately started to then deify, glorify, and exalt the feminine and the female way above the station of where it should have been. And this is a kind of an opening statement that's really clearly has an element of truth, but then at the same time seems to be glorifying the female. Yes, the female does breed. Yes, the female does produce the child. So here he moves into the sort of a philosophical, and he's telling you that this is therefore then not a unique, we're not meant to look at this thing as a unique creation, a child. It is an emanation of the body of the mother. She is first, biologically, and she's first symbolically, and she's first mythologically. And so everything that comes of the child being born, and this is a girl or a boy, is derivative and secondary. Now, somebody would say, well, that's fucking common sense. Of course it is. Chicken or the egg, right? I mean, okay, the mothers come first. Why are you trying to overstate that? Which is what he's doing. And you could ask that genuinely, why are you trying to overstate that? Why are you trying to overstate the obvious? Is there some point? Yes, but the point is the exaltation of womankind. But we've shown in previous program that always usually comes along with something else. It's always its ugly twin, which is the denigration of the masculine.
Mm-hmm.
So that already sort of makes us look at statements like this. If you're going to exalt one, you have to automatically unexalt the other, which seems to be their tendency. But however, I said there was a little bit of truth in that statement. There is. It is an absolute fact that the child, the germ of the child, is an emanation to all intents and purposes and then you have to argue until what point? Well, most people agree, sane people agree that when the child takes its first birth, when first breath, excuse me,
Mm-hmm.
and say when the umbilical cord is cut, that's the moment of independence. It's not going to matter that much, but technically speaking, it is the moment of independence, which you won't really see happening, for many, many more years. You've got stages to go through, but these stages are stages of differentiation, maturation, and individuality. In some children, that individuality shows up very fast, within months. For others, you don't really see the independence until quite late in years. But technically speaking, the birth is something special, and then the first breath, this is acknowledged even symbolically. Ancient Jews all knew about this, right? Ancient peoples, and the cutting of the cord. And therefore, this is the moment of independence. And then up until that moment, yes, you can say that 100% the child is just an emanation, in every sense of the word, of the mother's body. So then I say, right, well, those are the biological facts. And nobody's contesting those at all. But where the psychology comes in that's important is in reading the mind of a mother during and before this time. Any human being, no matter what, we're pretty vain creatures, right? All of us. So what does a vain creature do with that level of, shall we call it, dominion or supremacy over something that is utterly within its power, utterly vulnerable and fragile? Is there something to be, looked at in that? And of course, this is where the whole theory of the terrible mother comes in, because if that is exploited by a mother, the fact that she is supreme in every think of it, biologically, right? Archetypally, symbolically, you name it, every single ounce. She is the supreme being here. That's quite a lot of supremacy to handle. Yeah. And therefore, if it was in any other form of life, if somebody had that level of power, we'd be sort of a little bit question mark. If it was a boss, if it was a politician, a warlord, we'd be questioning. Why is it that with mothers we don't? And we have this automatically blanket feeling, that everything's just going to be rosy and peachy, when we damn well know it's not. And why is it that then when we have psychologists like Heinz Kohut and even R.D. Laing and other people, nobody wants to listen to them when they bring these things up, or the greatest, Alice Miller? You see, so there seems to be a bias there. So that's just a question. But the element of truth in that quote is clear. Yes, that's right. Up until a certain point, there is this. And so how can then the child, let's look at it from the child's point of view. As the child grows up and inhales this independence, what happens if its independence is really rather loathsome to it, given this biological fact? In this archaic state, wrapped up in a magical child thinking, was a very sort of safe and comfortable place where somebody said, you don't have to do anything, I do it all for you. I provide all the basics. Well, there's a lot of people who may grow up and say, I want that again. I'm not that happy with my independence. I'm certainly not happy with the fact that I had to delay gratification at a certain, 3 years old, potty training. I don't know, right? You can ask each pediatrician when it happens, mostly that the child has to delay gratification. That's for the experts. But we know what happens. It happened in our lives. Oh my goodness. What? You mean I just can't reach out and have that? And when I go to school, I'll scream bloody murder. Who are these foreign teachers? Who are these strangers? At home, I get everything I want. In fact, there's even this concept now called gentle parenting, where the child is denied absolutely nothing and grows up to know the value of nothing. Okay, that's a good one. That'll really work. But even without that, you have this idea of delayed gratification. And very many people never get used to it. That's why you have grown women squirming around on the floor of Walmart throwing tantrums in their business suits. How dare anybody say no? I'm not getting what I want, so I bang my spoon like a little kid. Well, with a little kid, it's perfectly natural. Kids should be doing that. That's perfectly natural. It's not natural for a grown-up to do it, you see. So again, the mother could be misusing this awesome power that she has and gets to like it, gets to like the flavor of tyranny. And the child may also grow up to say, I want a boss. I want to be told what to do. I've never really liked my freedom. And as far as I'm concerned, the orders and the house rules, that were put on me, that's good to go. And we've already spoken about if you are forced to leave the constellation of your family, you might go very, very early and form your own family as another means to get back into the same routine. This time not as the child, but as the parent. So this thing is a little bit more complicated than people think. The parent can be the child again, saying, I want to go back to the childhood level, and I found a way to do it. It's called having my own family, and I can be as dysfunctional as you like. I'll let the state take care of that. I'll let daycare take care of that after the children, mechanical toys that I bred. Now they ceased to kind of interest me. They were real fun in the first few years, rolling around and jumping around like little wind-up toys. But now that it's kind of time they have to go to school, they're a bit boring now. A bit boring. The high's gone. Oh, well, okay, we can park them at the school and park them somewhere else. It's kind of, it's over. Yeah. I never loved my kids for themselves. It's for the sensation, the pleasure of watching these little jumping beans. They do funny things. It's really hilarious. But once they've grown up, the fact that I cease to care anything about them as people clearly starts showing.
Yep.
Yeah. But if we want to move on to the next one, we can do that.
Self-assertion and reflective thinking took the place of immediateness and intuitive feeling. A center and a false one was established outside the nature of things, and around that false center, the new civilization has been established. This new order of things, which ought to have been of mind, but which is merely fancy, struggles hard to hold its own. Being set up against the natural order of things, it buys its freedom only by perpetual watchfulness, and it holds its domains only by constant warfare. It is pitted against the cosmic order and can only build its house out of subjective materials, which of course are only the real in a state of transformation. It is therefore only an unreal existence, one of show. Again from Bjerregaard in his work The Great Mother.
Yes, and this is very deep, but what he's really essentially saying is that the life of independence is a falsity. He's literally saying it there. The cosmic order from which you came is the real, and that's the mother. That's just like Erich Fromm was saying last time, that is the real of the real of the real. And this weird anomaly of independent existence is basically a sham. It's something that comes late in the day. It kind of makes it, but not really. It's a bit of a joke. And how it sustains itself is kind of like a mystery. It's like a freak thing. That's why it's fragile. It's somewhat vampiristic. It's not strong in itself. Remember, we talked about the denigration of the opposite. Has to be. Well, if you read that all over again, we won't do it, but people can go back and read. That's what you're getting. Once you have this gynocratic idea fixated in your mind, automatically, whether it's J.J. Precaution or Robert Berfault or Maria Gimbutas or any of the others, I'll send you a video, that hopefully you can post the link to, which goes into this fantastic video. See, but once you've got this installed in your mind, then automatically, without you even thinking about it, there's an automatic imbalance and an automatic bias in favor of the feminine. And we saw it with Erich Fromm, and we're seeing it now. But let's go on.
Given that we are immersed in nature and emanations of nature, how do we find it possible to stand outside nature, to ask questions about it? How are we able to objectify the natural world of which we are clearly a part? Is our capacity for objectification learned from the world?
Now, this is one of those philosophical asides that I spoke of. When you're reading comments like we've just read, this is a philosophical point that they're making, but nobody ever notices it. And that is, look, if the cosmic order is so supreme, which we know it is, I'm not doubting that, this is what we call the natural world, and we came out of it. Every cell in our bodies, the very flesh, the fiber, the gray cells, the lot, right? Bone, and we know it is because we return to it at death. Everything is born from the womb of nature. Then you tell me what the explanation is of how that entity has enough self-reflexivity to step back out of the natural order to look at it scientifically or objectively. there's an inherent paradox here. If you are absolutely 100% steeped in a thing, then that's called subjectivity. You and it are one. Right. So then how do you suddenly, at the same second, find a quality, a capacity to step back from that place that is you're born out of and built out of, and even the thinking must be an emanation of, and claim that you have this cleft or fissure that divides you, right, from that world, giving you now this ability to objectify. Now, we do have it, because if you didn't, you wouldn't know there's a world there. So there's something very, very odd here. And that's why I complain that most people have never looked into it all their lives. Now, the religious person has an answer. It may be the right one. That part of us, which is the soul, doesn't come from the natural world. It does come from somewhere else. And the soul or mind, right, is the quality that, of course, has this separateness from the natural order. We are two beings in one. We have the material part of us, and we have the spiritual part of us. And that makes a lot of sense. That's how we get the objectivity. Because if you leave what I just said out, I can't think of any other answer. How do you become an objective being to that which you are yourself made out of? It's an imponderable. You can't even begin questioning it. The mind has no answer. It has a set of opinions or, hypotheses, but you can't get any further than that. You'll never be able to confirm how it happens. So what this means then, that without the religious explanation, the materialist scientist listening to us, he gets uncomfortable at this point. Because if you remove the religious, explanation like they do, you tell me then, mate, how do you do it? That means that there must be some inherent transcendence within the natural order. And there's not a materialist on the planet who even thinks that way or accepts it. You've just confronted them with a shibboleth. You see how easy it is to do? That's why materialism is bollocks. If I leave out the spiritual and religious explanation that we just gave you, then you have to then admit that the only way that something subjective could also, divide, split itself so it could self-reflects and gain objectivity is that there's some quality within the entity that you're talking about, within that identity, that is itself transcendent, mysterious. But these are people whose job it is to explain mystery away, not to explain mystery. They come up with their matter as a dead, meaningless thing from colliding atoms and random chance. Oh, that's hardly meeting what I'm talking about, is it? Those factors hardly answer this question. So that's why they never ask about it. Let's go on to the next slide. There's another component to this, another part of this.
Apparently, our capacity for subjectification serves a deep, aberrant need to deny consciousness to the cosmos at large. It is a fallacy exemplified by the Cartesian divide and has not yet abated.
Right. So this is the same thing we're talking about, but seen from the subjective side now. Because if objectivity is not as robust as we think, and has some, if it turns out to be not a complete fallacy, but ontologically weak, I'm afraid what happens on one side of the scale must be on the other side. Right? If there's a failing with objectivity, then subjectivity cannot sit perfect. It must also suffer a flaw. This is the way it works. So we have these two realities. We've looked at the weakness of objectivity. It's a bloody mystery. And the only way to get out of it is to bring in some sort of spiritual, or transcendent answer. But on the subjective side, what do we see when it looks like it's built on quicksand, or is not as substantial as people thought? Well, there is one answer, and it's the answer that will devastate works of people like Descartes, not just him, but the entire materialistic paradigm that he gave rise to. Is this hardening subjective self that stands back from the cosmos doing so because that is its way to deny intelligence and meaning to the cosmos and only attribute that to itself? Is that what's going on? See, if you find that subjectivity and objectivity are spurious concepts or semi-spurious or are not there as substantially as we thought, we have to now look for other answers as why they're there. I'm not telling anybody to believe this, but one reason, and this would be a Heidegger's answer to somebody like a Descartes, is because if all the meaning is in my head, if all these qualities of transcendent qualities, and if all of the substantiality is in me, my thinking, then what I am allowed to do is subtract any kind of meaning or ontological status to everything else around me. I endow myself by disendowing the universe, and that's exactly what Descartes did. Everything became immediately lower. Animals, the cosmos, right? Gnosticism had already been toying with this 1,000 years before Descartes. But this is when it becomes codified. And this is when the Bacons and the Hobbes and the Comtes all went, we love it. You did it. Let's go. And the industrial age opened. So then later when existentialists start critiquing subjectivity, the readers were just like, what is this garbage? Because they didn't know what we're talking about. You have to know all of this in order to understand anything about existentialism. That seems to be critiquing selfhood. It's not critiquing selfhood. It's critiquing subjecthood, and there's a difference. Subjectivity can be seen as some sort of insubstantial Frankensteinian, mannequin. And we're talking now about how that would happen. Because in this extraordinary calculus, I can endow the human mind with all the rational traits, all the skills that are required, all the objectivity that is required, for the scientific paradigm to proceed. But at the same time, as Blake noticed, as Heidegger noticed, as the greats noticed, I am denuding and denying the material world, the world outside of me, of any kind of, glory. This is what's called the desacralization of nature. And only the human being can indulge in it. And it separates him from early man. It separates him from, the so-called primitive tribes who don't do this. And so here we have a bane. And I was always wondering that these wonderful books that you read on the goddess tradition and whatever, they're posing these questions implicitly and they never answer them. They don't even know they're doing it. So I just wanted to show my audience that this is a fascinating subject for many more reasons than, one would even understand. If I'm born out of the very stuff of nature, how do I gain the objectivity to be able to look at it and study it and know it as a separate object entity outside myself? How do I even... That's an imponderable. You can't explain it. And so there came this explanation from the spiritual side, and that deserves our due. That deserves to be looked at intelligently and say, that's interesting that they come up with that. I've got time to listen to that. But then if you find a weakness in the objectification, that looks, unstable, not as reified as we thought, then maybe the other side, the subjectivity, is a little dodgy and a little spurious and needs to be tested for strength again. Maybe it's not as robust as we thought. And what do you know? No, it isn't.
I'll say.
No, it isn't. And the Cartesian aspect then now starts to look rather dubious, because it is the apotheosis of exactly this, deification of the subject in opposition to the object. So something sinister that only very, very, very few minds ever even noticed. We're talking about maybe 3-4 people. I mean, it's really hardly anyone. even noticed or even considered this. There are men who did, but they're very, very few and far between, who even noticed on this deeper level that this arrangement had taken place. Something very, very, there's chicanery involved in terms of the human consciousness itself, needing to substantiate its own existence in opposition to the universe of which it is actually deeply a part. So there's, again, incredible thing to think about. Why would this happen? How did it happen? What is the cause of it? And how do we even, consider it? But if we can move on to the next one, maybe.
Sure. Devouring Mother. The elementary character of the archetypal feminine is far from containing only positive features. Just as the Great Mother can be terrible as well as good, so the archetypal feminine is not only a giver and protector of life, but, as container, also holds fast and takes back. She is the goddess of life and death at once. The cave is a dwelling as well as a tomb. The vessel character of the feminine not only shelters the unborn in the vessel of the body, and not only the born in the vessel of the world, but also takes back the dead into the vessel of death, the cave or coffin, the tomb or urn. From Erich Neumann in his work, The Great Mother.
Erich Neumann, yeah, of course, the great Jungian, right? Wrote extensively on this subject. That is a reiteration of what we looked at last week about this archaic mother and then the light mother who represents the transition into the solar world of reality. But there is this other, you can call it devouring feminine, the lower anima, if you will, that is conservative and regressive and fixed and wants to hold back that which it has birthed rather than release it, so that it can have independent existence. So that's just to get back to the theme of what we've been talking about, and to always remember this bivalence is very, very important, because these creatures who start writing extensively about the matriarchy, they don't write about this generally. There are some who do, and I like their works. But on the whole, the J.J. Bachofen types, they just wouldn't touch it. And they're deeply responsible for this biased opinion, which kind of took hold for a long, long time. But let's move on to the next one.
The figure of the terrible mother dominates the pre-Hellenic as well as the early Greek worlds with the same archetypal symbolism. The mysteries of death as mysteries of the terrible mother are based on her devouring, ensnaring function, in which she draws the life of the individual back into herself. Here the womb becomes a devouring maw, and the conceptual symbols of diminution, rending, hacking to pieces, and annihilation, of rot and decay, have here their place, which is associated with graves, cemeteries, and negative death magic. Here belongs also the blood-drinking goddess of death, whose hunger can be appeased only through the slaying of innumerable living creatures. Whether like Kali in India, she must be satisfied by the killing of men and animals, whether as goddess of war she perpetually demands the blood of men, or as goddess of death destroys all living things without distinction. Erich Neumann, The Great Mother.
Yeah, and he does well here to bring this out. I did a premium podcast called The Monstrous Feminine, and the second one in that series was called Goddesses of Blood, and people should check it out. Also, this other show I did called Blood Rights. Animals in their millions were slaughtered by these women cults. Everybody's heard of the Amazons being a bit warlike and wielding swords and bows. It's not even the beginning of the story. There's been a whole history of womankind that has been completely airbrushed from history, and it'd be frightening. And you only see elements of it when you see in modern commercials, these sort of Xena-like warrior women or Tomb Raider type warrior women with their bows and arrows, and you get it in car commercials and what have you, an ad copy, and nobody has the faintest idea what is going on with why is Robin Hood suddenly a woman? You get it over and over again, right? They're not tomb raiders, they're tomb makers, if you know the history. But again, they're playing on this atavistic memory in women and also in men. Diana, the goddess, right, was a huntress with her hounds and her bow. Yeah, just start thinking about what this might mean, or just watch the programs. You're not ready for it. People are not ready to hear the truth. Goddesses like Sekhmet, Durga, Kali, and on it goes. Athena jumping out of the head of her father fully armed and ready for battle, right? And the list goes on. Anat, the destroyer. Neith, whose symbol was a bow and arrow. Isis, unspeakable, right? So this dismembering quality, so I really recommend those. We can link up, or at least, people can remember the names. So the thing is that where does this devouring aspect come from? Where does this bloody aspect come from that they're trying to address? And Newman rightly does so. Why do we need to sacrifice to her temple? Why? What's that all about? That her womb is the tomb. She breeds all life creatures and they all can return to her. So she's both the grave and the incubator of life. So it's again a bivalent creature, somebody who gives birth, but the dead can come back to her as well. Extraordinary. But the funny thing is, this was socially accepted. Right? The great temples, this is, there's so many examples. I'll leave people to watch my videos on this because we could go on for hours talking about this. So I have to really curtail it. But the symbols of that cult are to be found in Masonry to this day and to be found in ad copy, as I just said. But the difference is you won't know it. It might even look glamorous. It might even be, in these movies when they make it look somewhat heroic, like they did in Terminator. And all, and it has a lot to do actually with comet worship, but we're not going to, as I said, we're not going to get into it. But if people watch the videos, you'll find out that some very strange things happen on our planet that then precipitated unspeakable events. And what has to happen then when you look at it is that you will suddenly realize the obscene idea that women are connected with animals or nature. You won't even know where that came from. After watching that program, you will suddenly realize you've been had. That wherever this idea that women are close to earth or close to nature or trees or something or animals or something, you will realize that that piece of mind control now doesn't work anymore. That has got to go. It's not true now, and it was never true in the past. Yeah. Far, far from it. So this would then, this impacts a lot of things. It impacts hugely. But then when you get into the works of J.J. Bachofen and Berfault, who speak about the Aphrodite woman and the Demetrian, you start to see all the fallacies that they dreamt up. It just was inconsistent and wrong. And it was picked up by many, many scholars whose books can still be found today breeding this nonsense. And some of it leaked over into some of the people we even deal with who, thoughtlessly trusted this research. But let's go on.
Strange struggle. The dialectical relation of consciousness to the unconscious takes the symbolic, mythological form of a struggle between the maternal feminine and the male child, and here the growing strength of the male corresponds to the increasing power of consciousness in human development. Erich Newman in his work, The Great Mother. At the bottom of this slide, there's also a message in parentheses which states, where does the male principle derive its energy for differentiation?
So this is the center of today's talk, really. The theme we need to focus on. There's something, you think what we've just talked about is extraordinary? No. In this ascent towards freedom, from the archaic, from the Tellurian, from the Chthonic, up to the Apollonian, solar, Olympian, whatever you want to call it, right? Into the solar world. I just make it simple. It can be seen as this primal struggle, and we're the result of it, so we know what happens. We also know that there's forces that try to arrest it. That's what the two previous slides were about. When this force tries to arrest this sacred development towards the light. But then I ask, in this struggle, where is this tiny little ego germ getting the energy for its ascent? In order to fight the great Euroboric serpent mother and squeeze out from her clutches and rise up into independence, it must have an energy. It must have libido. It must have power.
Yes.
But is it not true that that energy is coming from the soil that is its mother? So, wait, stop. Remember we've talked before about the very fact that the ego comes out of the unconscious and then has to fight all its life to stay in its center so it doesn't get overwhelmed by the unconscious, or for that matter, from the outside world? Right. But if the ego's origin was the id, it came out of, it blossomed out of, it grew out of like a little shoot, a little plant, from the soil of the unconscious, then everything that makes up its struggle, its muscular, vital struggle, it must have been taking those nutrients from its nemesis, from its enemy, as it struggled out for its, to breathe its own air of independence. Well, it's the same thing here. Consciousness cannot struggle without taking its sustenance from the very thing that it's trying to gain independence from. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm confused. That means that the sword that Perseus uses to cut off the head of Medusa is made for him, sharpened by Medusa, and handed to him by Medusa. Right, we've got a problem here. We've got a major problem, again, that they all skip over. These are things that keep me up at night.
Fair.
Because it sure as hell couldn't be coming from anywhere else. The whole problem, the whole movement, the whole stimuli to exit from the clutches of the natural, from the unfree, the energy is coming from the unfree, from the matrix. So that means that the matrix is extremely unusual. Why is it giving rise to that which it knows is going to separate from it and possibly conquer it? It's an imponderable. We can't know. These are the mysteries that the materialist does not want to deal with and pretends doesn't exist. And we are to be faced with them. There's something extraordinary going on. We talked about the subject-object divide being totally fraught with trouble and can only be understood when you bring in the transcendent function. And we even said that the transcendent quality may be within the natural order itself, something that nobody, I call myself a mystical naturalist. Now we're looking at why that is. But outside of that, people are not going to accept it. The religious man doesn't accept that. He brings in the transcendent, but it has to be a transcendent of the transcendent. It has to be otherworldly. Proving that he's really a Gnostic through and through. He's been infected by Gnosticism and doesn't even know it. But the Hermeticist says, no, the natural order, the transcendent is there. It's in the numbers. It's in the very matter that you're talking about. And it's only your own mental illusions that stop you seeing it. Maya is not the world itself. It's your thinking about the world and about reality that is the Maya.
Can confirm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is the same thing. Where is this hero getting his tools and his weapons? Where does he get his winged feet? Where does he get Pegasus? Where does he fly? Where is his wings to fly? It must come from the place that he is himself separating himself from, Does he ever question that? Does he ever see the paradox of it? The answer is no. He's so, in order to gain the freedom, he has to be so hyper-focused on it, like the phallic arrow that he is, the ichthyphallic force that he is. He doesn't stop and reflect. He can't afford to. So this then means that we can attribute to this cosmic matrix a lot more qualities than we probably normally do. And that's why I don't throw these books out. When I see these men writing with these biases and all, I don't throw it out. I see it as bias and I'm against it. But there's something even that they probably only saw with a glimpse. Something that still needs to come to the table. Right? What we call the material realm has got more properties in it than we know. There's more in it than in our philosophy. And this is just one iteration of it. The hero is receiving the very energy from the very serpent, Nemesis, that he is there to fight. The tools he has, the intention he has, is provided to him by that force. What do you do with that truth? That the key of your own salvation is in the hand of evil. That which you consider evil contains the secret of your own liberation. Wow. Doesn't your relationship with the world totally change? Is this why so few people ever gain liberation? Is this one of the banes of the world of light? That it blinds you to certain things as well as makes you see? Light has also many weird properties, not all of them good. And the dark side has many properties, not all of them bad. Is that what the deeper mystics were trying to tell us? Well, it certainly looks like it to me. But let's go on.
Newman points out that in the struggle for existence, the masculine principle encounters the destructive aspect of the feminine, which seeks to hold him to the ground. This means that violence, aggression, and destructiveness are first to be regarded as principles of the feminine and only secondarily of the male principle. And in parentheses at the bottom of this slide it says, "Is this fact conceded by feminists?"
Right. So as the hero is attempting to differentiate, and he does this quite unconsciously without any thought of violence or antagonism. It's just a natural organic instinct. And he only discovers violence when his will to individuate is resisted. By the ground. And so actually, what the feminists refuse to admit and refuse to tell anyone is that it is within the feminine maw, the feminine ground of being, that gives us our first understanding of restriction, aggression, violence, and destructiveness, as it attempts to hold the organic from being organic. And when it attempts to suspend and postpone, or even completely inhibit, the upward movement of the hero. So this means then that the qualities of violence and aggression and destructiveness are only secondarily to be found in the hero or the masculine energy, and primarily in the feminine. And there's no way out of it. So now do you see the destructiveness of the feminist movement? What we've been dealing with? How rotten to the core it is?
Like
because it is
aberrant
only
to nature. Yeah, aberrant to
right.
nature. Yeah.
Now you can't mitigate against it by saying, well, that's just the natural way of the ground. No, it isn't, because the ground can also give up. There's the good anima that says, oh, well, this is the way it is. Yeah, I don't like it, but I'm going to facilitate it because that's the natural order. And that's what we know as masculine females. So no, that's not an answer. We have been talking about this archaic anima and the fixed laws of necessity, and the fact that in the journey of the hero, he first discovers attention, which he can then only interpret as evil to his existence, something necrophilous, in the feminine. We had to wait to get to this through many programs. You dump this on people too early, they're just like, shut down. Got to make the sketch first. Like you said, many passes on the Sistine Chapel. I like that analogy because that's what you have to do. Yeah, it's restoration. So you can tease out these few facts. There's only a few of them, but they are earth-shattering. So the hero is not violent in itself. The masculine energy and the male energy is not, in fact, violent in itself. That has been chicanery. That is duplicity. No, it is actually a condition of the feminine, and the hero learns it as he then struggles against that which is holding him down. Just as you would if somebody was holding your feet as you tried to climb out of a swamp. You kick and scream. And in this kicking and screaming, one discovers their own inner power, right? Their libidinous power. They discover anger. They discover, aggression. But what awakened it in the first place? Where was that initiated? Where were these emotions initiated from in the absolute inception? And the fact that highly degreed people, men and women in the feminist movement, who must have known this, but with the Frankfurt School mandate that you won't even get a degree, we'll read your papers, and we have our boys in all the universities of the world, and you will not get a pass. This is why they had to tone this down. I know that some of these authors knew what I'm talking about, but they dare not write it, and they suppressed others who did until it made it not worth your while. The critical theorists were in their places, at the high table, and they would weed out anyone who had read the facts that are out there. All these facts are out there. But when they knew that somebody put it together in the right order, when they're suppressed, that's not part of the agenda. And the French and the British went along with it. Americans just followed suit. Horrendous. Absolutely horrendous. Let's go on.
Faced with a dual-aspected feminine principle, the lower and higher anima, the hero soon tires of her ambivalence and turns to Olympian god figures who endow him with the power to resist the seduction of the lower anima.
Yeah. So the rest is simple enough. Because of this dual aspected thing that we've seen time and time again here, the bivalence that we've been speaking about, it's too hard to handle for the consciousness that is narrow, focused on just ascent. And in the end becomes very tiring. It's all Stygian and Medusan, and we get sick of it. And so then the solar world becomes quite attractive, the Apollonian kingdom, which seems to be more ordered, more structured, more free, more airy. And this matters a lot, in the life of a girl. This is where I pick up in the Dragon Mother book, because I approach this from different angles and different works. So this then became the thesis that said that the solar world can be generally seen as a haven from the previous, from the lunar abyss. That's all this slide is really telling you. That it's simpler, it's clearer cut. Whether it's better, that's up for everybody else to work out, right? You have to work it out for yourself. Can't be influenced. If you're into your Ayn Rands, yeah, it's better, right? But a lot of people don't think it is. A lot of people in our culture don't think it is. That's why they love a welfare state. That's why they want open borders and tribes and horrendously primitive races pouring in and eating off the table. They don't mind all of this. But again, a conscientious person who thinks about what the forebears have built, who's steeped in the culture, steeped in the wisdom, the books and the literature and the music and the art, maybe doesn't want to see it all be destroyed. In the poetry and the films, the great movies, the great comedy. That matters. So the child, it would be a girl or boy, her masculinity then starts to say, hey, it's safer up here. We can just get on with things and we can improve the world if we're allowed, right? But the terrible mothers are pouring necrophilous creatures, their offspring, into the world to make that almost impossible now. It may be too late. Because that production hasn't stopped, hasn't ceased. In fact, it's got worse. It's been mobilized by big government, by communism, by socialism. This is where this becomes very political. And nobody's really pushed against it. In fact, they love it. People love it. Look at Sweden. They absolutely love it. And you can't even talk to them. They don't even want to know what you're talking about if you mention it.
True story.
Yeah. Is there any other slides, or was that the last one?
Let's see. I think that
We
may
have
have
the
been
three.
the last one. We're on the Paracelsus slide
Right.
right
That's
now?
good.
Yeah? Okay. Paracelsus, considered one of the greatest physicians of his time, declared that he had learned from the sorceresses all that he knew, from Shuttle and Redgrove in their work The Wise Wound.
Now we change gears into something absolutely remarkable, which has, again, you have to zoom out into history, moving from the psychology to the historical. And this perspectival thing we've talked about before, you need it. Otherwise, things aren't just going to fall into place. Now, in the series we did on Enslaved, we went into this, and this has to do with something extraordinary that even goes back to the sort of late Paleolithic, but certainly the early Neolithic. Paracelsus, of course, was the great healer, the greatest healer we've all known. And yet he is telling you that everything you learned came from women? I found that fascinating, you see. So what could he possibly mean? But let's read the next one.
The psychotropic tree. There are even legends of the prehistoric plant which women first took to cause their menstruation and the experience it gave them. It was called Lygos. Branches of it made bowers at the great women's autumn festival, the Thesmophoria, from which men were excluded, though there are indications that they might be admitted in women's attire. A quote from Shuttle and Redgrove, The Wise Wound.
All right. So what we have here is absolutely extraordinary when it's built out. And there's so much information on this. And I go into it in the Female Illuminati program that we've got. It's about 7 hours long. The whole thing was about 9 hours, and then we edited it down. Female Illuminati program. You can check that out on Enslaved. And this is all evidence. This is all empirical. And it was often a concoction, but the Lygos involved mistletoe, poppies, and all sorts of other hallucinogenic, certainly the Amanita muscaria, and plants like that, right? Mushrooms. But what was it for? Way back, women suffered from the menstrual pain as they do today. And so they were way more advanced into herbalism than men ever were and never have been. That's what Paracelsus was talking about. And all the Roman and Greek historians knew about it. All the Egyptians knew about it. This was well known in the ancient days. And the Thesmorphia was a great, coming together of the women, but the Bacchanalia, we call them the love feasts in the show that we did, right? Because John Allegro had exposed all of this happening in early Judaism and what have you, right? And but we're talking about the origin of it, why it started in the first place, not later on its religious iterations. It was to help with birth pains. It might have been also there to help abortion, although that's less likely. But it might have been, right? At times of great want. But mostly it was just to ease the pain of childbirth and the pain of menstruation. But then, after the women became very, very proficient at it, they started to administer the drug to their children. Yeah. When they would birth a boy, especially one who was going to become a nobleman or a king, Rituals would be done. Of course, this is all in code, right? But you get it in the story of Aphrodite and what have you. They would make sure that the boy child, would be administered some of this, including the menstrual blood in it, mixed with honey, mixed with other things that I talk about in those programs, and with regular wine, right? Which in those days was nothing more than just grape water, right? And so eventually, it took a while, but finally, grown men would be put on it. Again, it might have been for healing. It might have been to calm them down when they had wounds. But it moved on from that into something more. So let's read the next one.
Goddesses of intoxication. She lost no time, but put something into the wine they were drinking, a drug potent against pain and quarrels and charged with forgetfulness of all trouble. Whoever drank this mingle in the bowl, not one tear would he let fall the whole day long, not if mother and father should die, not if they should slay a brother or a dear son before his face and he should see it with his own eyes. That was one of the wonderful drugs which the noble queen possessed. Quote from Erich Neumann, who was quoting Homer's Odyssey on Helen of Troy's usage of the poppy plant.
Now, I don't know, but this makes my skin crawl. When you think of the mass slaughters of the ancient world, the genocides, the Huns, the Mongols, characters, tyrants that were in every nation, slaughtering women and children and all the rest of it, are we now to believe that this frenzy was being brought on by potions that were in the keeping of women, power women in the world? And if that turns out to be true, because only they would have known how to mix it, and they had to be part of a cult. You're not just going to take this from anybody on the street corner, right? You end up fucking raving mad. You have to take it from people that you trust, and these are these sibyls, these oracles, these very, very high priestesses. So once you put this all together, then this so-called matriarchy that everybody is lauding, is this what you're talking about? See, I believe it is. That's why I've done my work. And one of the secret weapons that they had were this potion that is being spoken of here, but many others customized for this and that and the other. They started with women taking it themselves, but then they had plenty of time to research what it was going to do to the male mind. And here's Homer telling you that you could bring a person's parents in front of them and slaughter them, and they wouldn't bat an eye or shed a tear. No amount of mass murder and psychopathic behavior, you just could handle it, right? It's unthinkable. But you were in the stupor, or you were in some other frenzy, like the berserkers. And Allegro and other scholars have talked about that the berserkers were definitely on stuff like this. The German berserkers, it's long been known, were on something like this. And what happened was that all this information is in the Dead Sea Scrolls Deception talk that we did. But what happened was that later historians, knowing that this was the case, toned it down and said that they were just drunk on regular alcohol. But the ones in the know knew this was a lie. That these berserkers were on a lot more than just plain, alcohol. In fact, there was alcohol, but it was spiced. And it was spiked with a lot of very, very peculiar things. And we get into the whole thing. Those programs need to be watched. I think it's 8, 9, and 10, or 7, 8, 9, and 10 in the series. It'll blow your mind. There's no point us going into it here.
I put them on the list to link.
Yeah. And they'd also drink the urine of animals that fed on the Amanita muscaria, like the reindeer. So when you see a Christmas tree, the little red mushrooms all around it, everybody giggles. And at Christmas time, you have the reindeer with the red nose.
Oh.
And you have the funny little elves dancing around, right? You wouldn't even believe. You wouldn't even believe what that was really all about. And how precise it was, how much chemistry, so to speak, went into it, right? The preserving of the alcohol, of the potion. Nor would you imagine what you went like in your mind when you were on it. And we have all those details in the show. But what we never, well, no, we brought it out in the show. I just wanted to do a short version here. Is that this was originally, the further you go back, you find out, they know this from finds that they made in the back of caves that women used as sacred, places when they were birthing or going through the menopause, the menstruation periods of the month. And they would calculate the moon and all of these different things. They found all these time sticks. So it turns out that they were watchers of the clock. They had their own clocks, these time sticks. They would make a crescent out of a bone, like a crescent moon, and these are marked with the phases of the moon, all under the auspices of women who meticulously watched the cycles. That's how the moon became associated with it, with women's cycles. But also what was played down was the use of these herbs. And it was in the keeping of the women for thousands of years. Some tribes were really expert on it. And it was only a matter of time before it started to be weaponized. It wasn't originally. And by good women right up until a very late age, it still wasn't. This was a strict code, right, where the positive women knew you only use this for positive purposes, strictly. But the witchery, no, the women could not resist using this for evil. And that goes back a long, long way as well. Let's read the next one, please.
Love feasts. In the celebration of the anniversaries, the priestesses of Aphrodite worked themselves up into a wild state of frenzy, and the term hysteria became identified with the state of emotional derangement associated with such orgies. The word hysteria was used in the same sense as aphrodisia, that is, as a synonym for the festival of the goddess. Newman quoting Hastings.
Yeah. So no one could believe what you're talking about here with these maenads, these bacchanalias, the love feast, the agape feast as they were known, right? Some of them were just terrible. Animals would be torn to pieces by their hands because they were enervated by, especially by the Amanita muscaria. That would turn you into a raving animal. So they had these long talons. So today, when you see Beyonce and Lady Gaga and these strange, or Abramovich, these weird images of blood dripping women with their fangs and their long claws and their serpentine eyes, and maybe seen in the proximity of a serpent as well. There's not one in a million people know what the hell that's all about. It all goes back to this. It all goes back to these feasts and to this power that the women enjoyed when they would let go and become hysterics. And Hollywood knows all about this. That's why there is always a conspiratorial aspect to this, because all these advertisers know all what we're talking about, through and through, inside out and upside down. And they've read your Robert Graves. They've read the Frasers and all the hundreds of authors that I've had to read, to find out about this. And we may even do some more on it as we go. But I just want to introduce this part because it explains something that changes our view. Because when you have power of this kind, and that gets into your race memory, and if then times come where, as we know this from reading the Old Testament, women were stripped of this power, officially stripped from the power because they'd misused it, then it follows that they wanted it again. They may not even be consciously aware of what's going on because it's what's known as atavistic. But never let you think for a moment that just because something is in the race memory and atavistic that it lacks power. In fact, as Carl Jung showed, the more you repress something into the unconscious, the more power it gets. And it can be triggered at any time. Well, the advertisers on Madison Avenue and the architects of control know exactly when to make the time. They know exactly how to trigger this in women. It doesn't exonerate women from being responsible because they should know their own psyche and they should know the history that I'm talking about. But they just say, no, you're a man. It must be all false. That's where they are. Brilliant. They can't look around in the world and see the advertisements and what's happening to young girls. But they say if a guy like Tsarion's talking about it, it has to be a false. That's as far as they've got. Then you are completely under the control of the enemy and there's nothing you can do about it. Even the sanity and the conscientiousness isn't even there. They call themselves empiricists, hard-nosed. Give me the facts and I'll do the rest. Is that right? The facts are all around you. Right? The higher women only use a bevy of eunuchs to work for them, in the companies and the corporations. You don't find real men in these magazines and Vogue and Cosmopolitan. If there's men around, they're all something else, all betas. So it's not masculine, anybody objectifying women. That one's got to go long ago. This feminism is occult. It's based on something very, very deep. And even those who know that haven't even scratched the surface of what we're talking about here. And you can prove all of this by ad copy. When we're talking about poppies and ad copy, just go watch My Female Illuminati. It's all in there. Example after example after example, staring you in the face. Even in alcohol advertisements and advertisements for medication. You'd be amazed what's put in those. It just looks like a little advert for Advil or something. Right? But if you only knew what's in those advertisements, let alone the more gory ones, which are kind of more obvious. No, even in your average Folgers coffee ad, or Smirnoff or whatever you've got, Absolute or whatever you got, there it is. If you know the multiple layers of the elixir and the soma, and what it's all about. And that level of power and that level of, if you want to call it, aberrant freedom that the women enjoyed was so rampant, and it gained them so much power. It was like a craze. They want it again. They're atavistically motivated to get it again. And the younger girl who's in her puberty is ready for the programming, ready to be triggered. And if they don't get it, then they turn the violence within and commit suicide, you see, or go for the tribal piercing number or whatever, or drugs or drink or alcohol, right? They have no clue. They're not in control anymore. They're spiraling out of control. Yeah. But now we notice it's reached even where they're now committing suicide, because something has to be done with that cache of energy. So yeah, thanks for reading those. That was the last one.
Problem. We actually have one last quote from Shuttle and Redgrove from The Wise Wound. It states, Egyptian pharaohs ingested an ambrosia called Sa, which was called the blood of Isis. Celtic kings were divinized by drinking red mead of the fairy queen Maeve, whose name was formerly Maeve or Mead.
Yeah, I think they're trying to say that mead was named after the goddess. So there again, you have it. This thing was an initiatory rite. See, in Egypt, no nobleman could ever be made pharaoh without an elaborate rite that involved the female priestess being involved. Absolutely had to. And then after he was made pharaoh, he wore the symbol of the two goddesses on his forehead, a vulture and a cobra. What nobody wants to tell you is that those were two goddesses. They're the oldest known goddesses in the world. Comes from the old stellar cult. And I write about them in 2 volumes. I had to do 2 volumes, can you believe it, to cover that symbolism alone. And the books are called the Trees of Life books, double volume. And I go into all of that. So he's wearing the diadems and the symbols of the female goddesses of Upper and Lower Egypt, and everything that symbolizes, and can't even become pharaoh, can't move up from nobleman to king to pharaoh without elaborate rites. Part of these rites was being anointed with oil. And that oil was always of the crocodile, which in itself was considered a serpent. Okay? And so the crocodile god, Sobek, was the son, lover of the great hippo goddess. This is the way they worked it. The hippo and the crocodile of the Nile, but they were transmogrified into Ta'urt, the hippo goddess, the most ancient goddess of all, and her child, Sobek. So the child would be slaughtered. He could be slaughtered, his fat taken and used then to anoint. And that fat was called chrism. from which we get the word Christ.
Oh.
Oh, yeah. This is in Egypt, the crocodile god. So it all comes from a stellar cult, but the females were the keepers of that because these time sticks and other evidence shows you that they were meticulous in keeping the clock. They were the first ones to realize that there was a connection between their own bodies, the cycle of menstruation and the moon cycle, and then from that point, other cycles as well. So they kept that. But what these books rarely tell you is that this part of, the entheogens that they also had to use because there's pain involved, sometimes considerable. And so their knowledge of herbs, and herbs grow in certain strange times as well, and need to be plucked at certain times. So the meticulous mapping of the time of the months and the year was, again, for a secondary purpose, which is to know when to pluck the right herbs. And you did it under the moon cycle. Certain herbs were never plucked at the full moon or at the new moon or at the quarter moon. There was very specific times when a certain herb, a certain plant was telling them, you pluck me now. And then when you mixed the plant with another plant, that had to be done at a certain time. And some of the times were extremely auspicious, more so than others. And then the priestess had to be herself then of a high initiate. This thing was all based on initiation. Not any old crone could do this. That was forbidden. So certain potions were dedicated only to certain cults and certain women who had the power. And on it goes. And so every culture in the world, from the Far East to Europe, was involved in this. Later, the men learned a bit of it. And no doubt it was used, as a salve for wounds and what. But anyone who thinks that it ended there just doesn't know their history. And they certainly don't know their John Allegro. It went far beyond mendicants and simple apothecaries. And it started having this out-of-body aspect. Now, this matters a lot because if you raise a child drinking these herbs and they're out of their bodies most of the time, then you have not only enormous control over their behavior. We're talking about the power behind the throne here, but you also have them conceiving of things like immortality that may be totally farcical. You got them going around out of their heads, just like that quote said. And do you think that they're not going to deify the feminine principle on this substance? We're just looking a little bit more now at the consequences. I mean, isn't the history of art alone enough to show you that there was some major deification of the female body?
Yeah.
When you look at the goddesses, the temples that were erected to them, the women weren't building them. The men were. And when you look at the character of certain goddesses like Circe, you see, goddesses who hold the chalice, goddesses who hold the jar, like Mary Magdalene is shown holding the little jar of spikenard, but that doubles up, doesn't it? It could be the jar that the blood of Christ at the crucifixion was gathered in, that jar. We don't know. They collected his blood into the chalice that becomes the Eucharist. But how many people told you that the women would also gather the semen from hanged men in little jars like that?
Wow.
To be used later on in these potions? How many people told you that? Many men would be hanged with an erection, and the women would collect it in little jars to be used years later, even, homeopathically, put into these potions. There's some very odd things went down during this time. And so with this level of power, I mean, you've got to realize that if men would literally castrate themselves as high priests, as eunuchs, nothing is too far-fetched. To serve the goddess, you'd literally willingly castrate yourself, then nothing is too far. You see, and I go into this in all the different programs. And the ancient ones that did this were called the Galli. It was one of their most common names, the Galli, Galli. That is the capital G turns up in masonry inside the compass and protractor. That if you're not looking closely, if I was to show you a picture of the castrating tool that was used for castration, and you'd blinked, you'd think it was the Masonic compass and protractor. It's subliminally meant to look like one. And the capital G for Galli, meaning castrati, is in the middle of it. When you turn to the New Testament, you hear about the Nazarenes, but you also hear about a group called the Galileans, of which Jesus was a member. The Galileans? Oh, and what were they up to? Did you know that they were goddess worshippers? Did you know that they were castrati priests? No, because it's all been hidden. And the man who brought this out, like John Allegro, they were completely professionally assassinated. The Vatican went wild, right? Just go watch my series, The Dead Sea Scrolls Deception. Watch it from the beginning to the end. You wouldn't believe what's been happening in very recent times to cover this up.
Well, I have some questions just based on what you've discussed over this episode. I'm just finding the parallels of this past and how it's echoing into the present very compelling. It's kind of hard to deny. For instance, you talked about the matrix and the concept of how from the earth and from nature, what is birthing this life is providing it with the life force energy and libido to actually separate, and that in nature it does eventually let go. It makes me think of a seed casing of a seed and how it holds on to the plant as it's developing its hardiness, and then eventually the seed casing falls away and then the plant can continue to flourish and unfold as it naturally would. And then I think about the present and mothers and this, we've had this going on for some time now where parents are putting, like some parents are allowing their children to transition in ways where they're literally suppressing their hormones. They're using medications and such to dampen, well, really their natural development and thus consequently the natural development of their consciousness. Would you say that the parallel I'm drawing here echoes to what you've been demonstrating through this episode?
Oh, 101%. I'm so glad you brought that up. All these things that we've talked about the arresting, devouring mother, is taking place in exactly what you're talking about. Even most of the physicians are women.
Mm-hmm.
And they back it 100%. Name me one who doesn't. And the mothers are all into it, super into it. It's all manifesting in different ways. Otherwise, this would be pointless. This would be some misogynist rant, right? Leave the guy alone. He's foaming at the mouth. No, this is happening to girls and boys. They're in a state of confusion. We talked just now about the castrati. What's that all about? It's happening right now. It's back.
And in this castration, when you talk about the consciousness developing, it's leaving the feminine, this masculine principle, we could say, to grow. But it's being fed by this feminine principle so that it can grow and separate and evolve. That's just one way I would see it. Um, where was I going with this? Uh, Essentially, what we can really see very much in our society is this suppression of that differentiation, of that individualization. And when I think about just how mothers contribute to that, it makes a lot of sense because even with using the trans example here, I mean, there's a lot of other ways I could see how this plays out in even more seemingly mundane ways. But using the trans example, just to even bring up a concern to say, well, maybe you shouldn't transition your child can actually be met with such vehement opposition from people in society these days as if you're the wrong one for having concern for the health and the natural development of a living being. And I just wanted to mention these parallels because it's so compelling when I think about what you've been saying, because um, when I think about how women could be seen as emissaries of nature, it's most undeniable at this point how we can see how it's become much like Ian McGilchrist speaks about with the left brain dominance. and how there's too much focus on separation and compartmentalization, to the detriment of being able to see the bigger picture and seeing from a more, I would say, healthy point of view of the connection to nature, as you were talking about earlier around the first slide. The inextricable connection we have with nature. We can really just see how this left brain dominance, how it can, I mean, it can play out through either sex, but I'm really seeing the parallels here, how women with the left brain dominance, how it plays out in a way where it literally suppresses not just themselves, but even, well, I mean, the men in their lives, the children in their lives. It's just a comment, really more than a question. But yeah, it's just coming through quite a lot as you continue on in the series.
It will. It will. See, some violations have been done, and our modern era only wants to focus on the violations of the male. Is what I object to,
Hmm.
and it's gone way, way overboard. And I say that you have to balance that out. In our little shows, we show that there's been violations on the historical level, that women are not into the natural. They violated the natural order. And then on the individual domestic level, there's violations as well. I think both are parallel. Of course, there's interweaving, but there's violations on both sides.
Yes.
And you look at the historical and you find it. And I referred people to those other programs that I've done, which will, totally and utterly leave you aghast and prove that point beyond all doubt. You'd be amazed what's been hidden. And then when you look more close up into the individual social and domestic, you'll find a reason for all the single mother homes, for the treatment of men in the courts, and the abominable treatment of parenting, in terms of parenting with children. And then this spills out into the education boards and the farce that is, you see. And then they think that homeschooling is going to be some sort of remedy. Well, yeah, we can argue about that. And it means that civilization is in a very, very dire position, because you are breaking the natural order and you were meant to be custodians of it.
Mhm.
But you let the ball drop. The women, instead of studying the natural and tapping into the real natural within them, they gave that all up. And men didn't force them to do it. They did.
Well, it makes me even think of our menstrual cycles from the beginning, at least from what I remember, and the girls around me who, when we began menstruating, we were given suppressants immediately, symptom suppressants, and it was seen as an inconvenience every month to have these symptoms. But
Hmm.
from what I gather, every month it's meant to be, at least from my experience and what I've heard other women who are trying to, connect to the natural as much as they can. These are periods of initiation where we have a chance to develop our consciousness through these symptoms because there's wisdom in the pain. And if we don't do that, it tends to get to the point where we're on the precipice of menopause and we start becoming more insane because we've been avoiding all of these cycles, these natural cycles. I mean, some women will even take certain types of birth control to suppress their period entirely because it's seen as an inconvenience. And while on one hand I can see the pseudo logic in that, it cannot be denied the consequences of these choices, the insanity eventually when women become older and they get to the point where they are in menopause. It continues where now let's take even more medications to suppress this rite of passage into a point where we're supposed to be developing the wisdom that to help the future generations to come up because we're on our way out. So it's just really honestly, it's quite tragic. And it's a bit a behemoth at this point as far as the cultural belief systems go.
It sure is. It sure is. The aberrations are being mobilized, to build big pharma, build big psychiatry, more and more drugs. Something's really wrong with that picture. Um, it's all about, somebody saying, we want more freedom. But then the question comes up, then what have you done with that freedom? In the institutions. And all you can do is just blame men for everything. You see, I think that is becoming like the race card. It's running out of steam.
Mhm.
It really is. And it's actually going to backfire. There's going to be a backlash on that. That's already happening.
I was going to say we're seeing rumblings of that already, and it
Yeah.
doesn't seem like it's going to abate anytime soon. If anything, I think it will continue to grow in momentum.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right.
Well, at least I hope so, because we do need the masculine energy to come forward, as you've demonstrated in this episode. It's, at least from my read on what you were describing, it's the evolutionary force. And we won't be able to develop and grow as a species if we do not let this masculine force do what it needs to do naturally, and let it and let it, that seed casing, fall away so that it's not suffocating. It needs to be allowed to come into the world. So that's at least what I was getting from, I mean, you said so much in this episode, but that seemed to be a major message that I took away from this.
Yeah, this one was covered a lot of ground, especially the deeper issues that usually these books do not talk about.
Mm-hmm.
And I found that, very strange. But well, first of all, they are digressive. You would have to stop what you were writing and then go in a large, digression. Even your footnotes. And maybe there's no answer. People wanted shrink-wrapped answers to this. That thing we were talking about. Where does the energy of the hero come from? It has to come from his ground. The very thing he's trying to separate from and differentiate from. He owes his very life force to it. Then why would that ground involve itself in such a strange exercise? Why does it throw up the hero? Why does it allow that hero to grow so that it will come back and enter into the dragon fight? Now, one would say, well, the cosmic serpent is eternal. You only think you behead it. You only think you overcome it. You do temporarily in the journey towards your own independence. But of course, we know this thing doesn't die. It only transforms itself. So these are some of the, the inherent transcendent qualities of the Matrix. And it's only the materialists who've misread it. These are not Victor Schaubergers. These are not Walter Russells who've presented it to you in the right way. They're not Wilhelm Reich. These are high priests of the lie that for hundreds and hundreds of years have been misinterpreting what we call matter. Matter is mother. What do we know about it? What do we know about our actual cosmos? The great teachers say fucking nothing. You've been too busy thinking what's beyond it in your Gnosticism, looking past it, or merely scraping, taking some parts that you like the Christians have done, but then leaving out all the rest of it, and trying to minimize the role of the material. And say there's some other world outside of this world that's higher. How can I falsify that? How can I prove that? There may be transcendent qualities within the material, what we're calling the material. Jung believed that there was. He called it the psychoid realm. A deeply fundamental level where psychic and material energy overlap and mysterious things happen. There's a dialogue taking place. And this is where you can then, argue that he has a metaphysical aspect. Some writers have. That Jung, although he called himself an empiricist on nearly every page he wrote, he is actually, this is where a certain level of metaphysicalness, maybe even some sort of idealism creeps in with Jung, much as he would like to deny it publicly. But it can't be doubted. You say that, and we're into a whole other world here. His psychoid world. The two natures work together. The inner nature, which is the unconscious, and the natural world outside have a sort of hidden language. Laws that govern one hemisphere also strangely govern another. And that's not been noted by anybody except hermeticists. But our science went off in a whole different direction. Freud put the kibosh on the whole age of reason, the whole rationalistic movement, by saying that you're not in control of everything in your mind and your moods and your, hang-ups and what have you. Because what that means written large is that the intellect is not going to solve all the mysteries of the universe. It's not even capable of it. You are a walking mystery that's deeper than all the external mysteries that Isaac Newton and Galileo solved. You, the thinker, are deeper than all of those. That's what Freud is basically saying. And you will remain a mystery to yourself. How are you going to handle that? What are you going to do about it? And yet they just plowed on as if nothing ever happened. The Darwinian thing just continued going whether he'd spoken or not. A silly little Jew from Vienna. He's just kiboshed your entire enterprise. You think that would slow you down, make you more reverent, make you consider some of the points we've talked about. And there's many, many others.
Well, with each episode, it's becoming, I'm sure for those who are listening and listening with sincerity and taking this into consideration, it's getting more and more difficult for anyone who may have refuted what you were saying in the beginning, I feel. The logic is sound, and I still stand by that. And was there anything else, just as we conclude, was there anything else that you'd like to share with those who are listening today, Michael, before we end?
Oh, well, not really. I think we've covered a lot, a lot. There's
Yeah.
different rills and valleys we've looked at in this. Because as I said, there are very interesting little, you can sidelight the subject we are talking about. There's all sorts of sidelighting that can throw up other philosophical points. And we've looked at several of those. And some of them are deep mysteries that can't be answered. Is the cosmic mother such a being that it can form its own nemesis so that processes of objectification can in fact take place? And if so, why? What would be the object of that? Well, that is one possible answer, that there's a deep need within the cosmic matrix that we know as nature to objectify itself. Right? Because its mysteries are so deep that it has no perspective. There's no Archimedean point from which it can evaluate its own being. And so some urge within the matrix itself threw up the masculine principle. Right? Think of a drop of water. You always see that pillar, and then you have that little dot of water above it.
Yeah, the water splash.
So we're talking about this little phallic movement that stimulated. The Egyptians used to call it the primordial mind.
Hmm.
We would know it as ego consciousness, the realm of the gods. So that now a certain Archimedean point can exist where the mysteries that are the mysteries can be surveilled. We have this stand back quality. But I'm telling you that there's no doubt that stand back quality, which we call objectification, is an attribute of the very thing that shouldn't have it. It's endowed. It's an endowment from the very thing that is the pure subject. But if there's pure subject, then there's no object. It's immersed in itself. But maybe that constitutes a kind of a amorphous blindness in some sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the ground of God, the ground of spirit. And it's been described that way by some of the very top idealists. And so there was a primal disharmony, right? Which then created what Jakob Bohm called the dark light and the white light.
Mm.
Yeah, the centrifugal and the centripetal, the eros and the thanatos, a disharmony, a contrarium, which amounts to the fact that a part of that ground could separate itself and be able then to do, to divide it, to bifurcate, just like you said earlier about left and right brain, because that's a manifestation of what we're talking about. So this is very empirical, becomes empirical very quickly. It sounds like metaphysics in the beginning, but becomes very empirical very fast. People read my Contrarium article, they'll know that. And we've done, many podcasts on this, on Unslaved. And that's how when an individual is born, they are born with this inherent capacity to split. Where did it come from? Who waved a magic wand and allowed you to have that principle? Materialists can't answer that. Doesn't even approach an answer to that. And yet there it is. The ability to specular like a mirror, right? Become observer and observed. But we just looked at it in a slightly different way today, different language. It is like something amorphous and vast, right? Which in the magical tradition is called Nuth or Nut, needed the point, which is called Hadith, right? The great circle of the expansiveness needed a central point, like the Indians' flag, right? They used the great wheel of samsara. In the wheel is the center, the bindu. And that bindu is a compression. So the great Isaac Luria, the great Jacob Boehm talked about this. This compression, the sucking in, God sucks his energy in to a concentrated point, knowing that in this compression, the gap that is left has to be filled with something. The sucking energy, right, opens up a field that has to be populated. And that's how we get the creation. And so something similar is happening in nature that produces its opposite, what we call opposites. But we are unaware, you see, of the underlying connective tissue beneath. And the great German idealists, like the German mystics before them, like Giordano Bruno and Pico della Mirandola and a few others, Marsilio Ficino, some of these people and the great Kabbalists, they started to look into this and they wanted to express it. So they did in their Hermetic teachings, Kabbalism, Hermeticism, right? Certain amount of alchemy, and mostly the German tradition. But as we've talked about many, many times, this was being observed by the British nominalists and the French materialists, followers of Auguste Comte. And, you know, in England, you got Thomas Hobbes and Francis Bacon, many more names you could mention, John Locke, whatever, right? And they didn't like this. And they had plenty in Germany who were materialistic as well. I'm not saying that there wasn't materialists in Germany as well. Of course there was. But the towering names there were the ones who were mostly idealistic, trying to look into the very things we're talking about. What is that connective tissue underneath? They call it dialectical monism. One thing expressing itself in two different ways. And they wanted to chart that. They wanted to map that. Because they were starting to notice its ramifications in everything you do, including breathing in and out. Right? The flex of an arm, and reflex and flex. Every masculine and feminine, male and female, black and white, good and evil, are all part of this contrarian. So they were on its scent. And for a while, many interesting things were being, discovered. But it gets sabotaged, right? As all great things do. Evil can create nothing of its own. It always has to mutilate and vampirize and predate.
Yeah, cannibalize.
Yeah, and suppress, ultimately suppress that which is there, and hopefully you just forget about it. Throw so many sweets at you that you just get distracted like a monkey, and then you forget about something else, you see? And they've done a beautiful job at that.
Well, I don't know how beautiful it is because people are insane.
Yeah, that's it.
The
That's why
symptoms
they are.
are very distressing. We can see it all around. Yeah.
This is the chance of being lost. They've lost. You lose your way, and you become more and more necrophilous.
Well, I want to say that I feel this show, this series, all of the people that are watching this and learning from it, and even the people who have been maybe feeling triggered in the beginning, but continuing because there's a part of you that is connecting to what Michael's saying, a part inside of you that's resonating, that wants emancipation, that wants liberation from the Stygian abyss, well, to use Michael's term. I appreciate that you're staying and listening. And from what I can tell, it seems we'll be continuing further into this series and we'll have more really, really valuable information to share with you. And I feel that this can contribute greatly to your efforts for liberation, for freedom. And at this hour that we're in for humanity, it's much appreciated, Michael. So thank you again for coming to the show and sharing what you know.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me.
And with that, we bring this episode of The Dark Side of the Female Psyche to a close. There's still more to come in this series, so make sure you're subscribed to Willfully Evolving Woman here on YouTube and turn on your notifications so that you'll know when the next episode is ready. More social media accounts may be added in due time, so if that interests you, bookmark willfullyevolvingwoman.com and be sure to check back periodically. If you would like to follow Michael and learn more from him, you can find his works through the following channels: dragonmother.org, femalepsychology.org, and of course, michaeltsarion.com. And if you're interested in Michael's premium presentations and the Unslaved podcast, you can find those by becoming a member at unslaved.com or unslaved.substack.com. I'm Sarah DeHaven, and on behalf of Michael and myself, thank you for being here, and thank you for listening. See you in the next episode.